if we're compensating for our loneliness or our broken love with addictions, that's going to make it harder for us to get unbroken love. And that's why we need God. He's the only one that I know that can stop those cycles.
Hey, welcome back to the Overflow Podcast. This is a podcast on a mission to discover how you and I can live a life of abundance, full to overflowing. We're chasing personal growth in a spiritual direction. And in this second season, we're talking about broken love and redeeming grace, how we can navigate the brokenness and find the path to redemption. This is episode 10. My name is Karl Lindsay, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Philip Milosavljevic. How's it going, Philip? Welcome back.
Karl, what's up, my man? It's been a little while.
Yeah, how was September for you?
September was full of unique openings for us. Our young adult ministry over here in Loma Linda just opened up in person, which was kind of fun and exciting. And so we've been seeing some great growth. We started with 90 people at our first gathering, and now it's up to like 300. So
Wow.
that was a quick thing. I think people were just craving being together. Talk about loneliness and now how that enters into a real life example.
Yeah.
So that's been really fun. And then also my wife is about to deliver our little baby boy
True.
coming up here in October. So that's been just kind of fun working out the room and figuring out invitations. We're gonna have a little baby shower, and there was a little scary moment where she was feeling some preterm labor things. But besides that, she's doing well and healthy.
Okay. We're pre-recording these episodes, so we'll have to like preempt the birth and congratulate you before he's born. So
That's awesome.
see how
Hey,
that
tell
goes.
me about you.
September for us was a little bit challenging. My grandma actually passed away, which was sad for my family.
Oh no.
But it was a blessing to have her in my life for 30 years.
Wow.
She was a missionary with her husband back I know when I was born, actually, I went over to Pakistan with my parents they took me, I should say. And we visited them. So she and Grandpa were such a legacy of service and faith for me. So I'm glad to have her influence in my life.
Loss is painful, man, no matter who it is, but especially when someone's that close to you. I am so sorry, brother.
Yeah, we're taking it well in the sense that, I mean, coronavirus has made it hard, but we're grateful that we have that hope for a future.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, brother, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for your friendship, and I know that you're probably being strong for your family, so we're going to keep praying for you, brother.
Thank you, Philip. Yeah, it's been an interesting few weeks for sure. But we're grateful for the support of so many friends and family. Looking into season 2 now, we're at episode 10 or episode 1 of season 2. What we're going to do is look at broken love and redeeming grace. We want to look at some of the ways that the perfect love of God has been hijacked and twisted, and how God's grace pulls us from our broken state into a glorious new reality and understanding. And also into a new way of life, because that's what we're talking about here with the overflow, right? Is you get into that new understanding, and then you just have this overflowing reality.
Yeah. I'm so excited for this journey, where we're going to go with this next season. I really think this generation in particular needs to recognize God's redemption through their brokenness, because people are really in this space of authenticity right now, and wanting to find healing for that authentic space is so needed in a spiritual way. So this is going to be fun.
Yeah. So the plan is to break the theme into 2 mini-series, one on broken love, where we're going to be interviewing Jennifer Schwirzer, who's a therapist, and then we're going to dig into the gospel to discover God's redeeming grace in a deeper way with Jonathan Leonardo. So Philip, let's start here. What comes to mind when I say broken love?
I immediately jumped to the story of Hosea and Gomer, when you say broken love. Here's the story of a prophet in the Old Testament named Hosea, asked to marry a prostitute who is so broken in the sense that she had all these visions and realities that she wanted to fulfill in her life, and found herself in a hard space where, even still today, men or women can find themselves in prostitution, but they are so broken. Realizations of, I thought I'd be married. I thought people who would take care of me would take care of me, and they didn't. And God has a way of redeeming that brokenness. And so the prophet Hosea comes in, and he's called to love and to heal this brokenness by his love. And this was to be a symbol to God's people. I love you in spite of your brokenness, in spite of your infidelity towards me, in spite of what you're trying to do to heal your brokenness in these negative and bad ways. I'm here to love that well. So that kind of comes to my mind. What about you?
Yeah, I love that. I think of the healing process as well. To start with, I'm thinking though of, first of all, love and the perfect love that God kind of designed for us. And then let's break that. What has been the case in our society? What are we used to? The love that we're seeing in relationships, in friendships, in the world, in media portraying love for us today. How is that resembling God's love, and how is it not? And so that's what I'm thinking of, how love has kind of fallen short of what we are expecting. So that's where I'm getting towards with broken love for me.
Yeah, there's a lot of that falling short experience for so many. I think most of us assume sometimes that relationships, either in our idealistic self, oh, they're going to last forever, this is going to be great, or there's just this jadedness, like, oh, this isn't going to last, this is great, but when is it going to break?
Yeah. You mentioned a moment ago about loneliness. We're talking before we started recording just about this first topic. We're jumping into loneliness and trauma and a couple others in this Broken Love series. I read recently that research is showing that loneliness can be as bad for our health as obesity or smoking. And I just thought that's crazy. So that's why we need to kind of talk about this topic in the realm of broken love.
Wow. And if that's the case, that means this is an issue we can't ignore any longer. I don't know if you're a listener here resonating with the topic of loneliness. You felt it in your life at some point. You know someone who's deeply lonely. You are not going to want to miss this interview that Karl and Jennifer have. So stay tuned to the conversation we'll have after. But here is the interview with Jennifer Jill Schwirzer.
Welcome to the Overflow podcast, Jennifer.
Oh, it's so good to be here.
Yeah. Jennifer Schwirzer, right? Is that how you say your last name?
You said it perfectly. That's very unusual.
I enjoy trying to figure out how to say it.
And you're not even from my country, and you said it right.
Where is your husband from? I assume it's his name?
Yeah, it's his name. He's German descent.
German descent. Okay, yeah.
So it's like Schwirzer.
Oh, right. Yeah. It's in the German, right. So you're living in Orlando now? Is that right?
I am. That's correct.
Okay, so you have one husband, as we just talked about, and two daughters, I understand.
Yeah, it's just one husband.
Yeah. Tell us about
daughters.
Tell us about your family and what you've been up to in Orlando.
My kids are grown. Now, this is kind of weird because I moved to Orlando. When I moved here, one of my kids lived in Florida, and she ended up moving into a tiny home on our property. We bought a small farm. And my other daughter lives with her husband in Portland, Oregon. And recently, my youngest daughter moved out to Portland. So they live out there.
Is a move to Portland on the cards?
No, not yet. I don't want to live there yet. I know it's beautiful out there, but I just don't know if I could part with, number one, my sister, and number two, the sunshine.
Fair enough. Yeah, Portland is not sunny.
No.
So you're an author, you're a musician, a licensed professional counselor. A few years ago, I suppose, you started this ministry called the Abide Network. It's designed to be a network of counselors. You were just getting too much business there, but you've added some things like some seminars and courses and educational things for counseling, coaching, all these things. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
it just grew from just little old me trying to meet the needs of clients that came to me in a private practice to getting too many clients and then finding some friends that saw things similar to the way I did, that counseled in a similar way, referring the clients to them, then deciding, oh, we need a name and coming up with a bite. And then it just started growing from there. We have today 4 free telephone support groups, 4 different times of the week that anybody can join, anyone in the world, if they can find one that works with their time zone. We have ongoing trainings a couple times a year here in Orlando at the farm. We have a farm called the Biting Place Farm where we have events and we do these trainings and people can join via Zoom. And we actually train people how to do what I do as a counselor, what we do as counselors and coaches. And it isn't necessarily, they're not using it as a business, most of the people that attend the training, but they use it in their relationships and so forth. So I teach people things like how to do cognitive behavioral therapy and basic principles of mental health. So we do that. We have anxiety and depression. Those are the 2 most common diagnoses. We have an anxiety and depression course that is video online. People can go through that course or they can go through it with a coach. We bundle it different ways. So that's been available. I've been doing seminars in churches for years that combine spirituality and mental health. So we've got all that and more. It just keeps rolling and growing, and God is really growing it. I'm just sort of watching him work. It's really exciting to me.
Oh, that's great. I love the name, and that, especially that idea of bringing it down to the lay people's level, because that's really what's needed today, I think.
Oh yes. We don't want to make it mystical and esoteric as if only certain magically endowed people can really help people with their psyche.
Yeah.
It's not that deep. You learn certain principles, and I'm not saying that just anybody can handle someone that has schizoaffective disorder and is currently having a psychotic break. I don't encourage anybody to operate outside of their scope of practice, but to impart mental health principles in a way that makes it accessible to the common man is what I'm all about.
Yeah, love that. Well, we'd love to talk to you about a little bit about this that therapy experience and making it a little bit more accessible for our listeners. We're starting this series called Broken Love and Redeeming Grace we'll get into in a few weeks' time. So today we wanted to look at loneliness because studies today are more and more showing more and more today that what we really, I guess I've already known, even if we didn't haven't necessarily applied it very well, that our physical health and our psychological health are deeply connected to each other. So
that's right.
I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest that our spiritual health is tightly woven in there as well. That's kind of why we want to talk about this idea of broken love and connect the dots between our emotional health and our spiritual well-being. So our first topic in this mini-series is loneliness, which I think it couldn't be a better place to start because I think it's such a widespread epidemic. A study came out in January revealing that more than 60% of Americans are lonely, and that was before the lockdown, so it's probably a lot worse now. And I've read that a survey of doctors in England, 75% of doctors were seeing 1 to 5 patients every day who showed signs of loneliness. So they decided over there, you may have heard, that the problem was so bad that they designated someone as the minister.
The minister of loneliness, that's right.
So
it's a great idea.
Yeah, their job, I guess, was to fight the emotional isolation that was becoming increasingly normal.
And what an insightful thing for them to do, because typically people sever psyche from physical health, but they were acknowledging straight up that people are lonely, they're going to get sick.
Yeah. So with the coronavirus pandemic now, we're experiencing an uptick in problems like this, mandatory isolation, social distancing, etc. So today we want to talk to you about loneliness, what we can do to fight it, and how it relates to our vertical relationship with God.
Let me throw in one more stat for you. I found this morning. The global health company Cigna did a survey of 20,000 Americans and found 1 in 4 Americans feel that no one understands them. 2 in 5 feel that their relationships are not meaningful, and only about half of Americans have meaningful social interactions.
Only half. Wow.
And the tragedy of that is, here's the thing, we are created in the image of a God who has never existed in isolation. The Father, Son, and Holy
True.
Spirit have existed in union from eternity. And so built into the Godhead itself, and then, of course, those made in his image, is this connection factor. And if that connection factor is not addressed and not satisfied, people do not function as they are designed to function.
Yeah.
And so there is a spiritual component to this. And if people are not connecting, they're going to get physical issues. Loneliness has been associated with cardiovascular disease, elevated blood pressure,
Mm-hmm.
cognitive decline, poor emotional regulation, less physical exercise, personality disorders, psychosis, suicide, and diminished executive control, and then poor sleep. So what happens to people when they're lonely is they end up experiencing an arousal of the limbic system. The limbic system is the part of the brain that experiences emotion generally, but then specifically fear.
Okay.
And so they're in kind of this chronic fight or flight state just for being lonely, not because a lion is outside or there's someone with a gun or anything. Just from being lonely, they're experiencing this chronic low level limbic arousal. And that's bringing with it a host of disorders and diseases that are associated with stress.
Yeah. Wow.
So we are designed to live in union with one another. Like you look at a baby, and a baby has one of two modes. The baby is either connected to its mother, and this is what we call attachment theory. That secure connection to the mother calms the baby. Either the baby is in connection to the mother and calm, or he feels disconnected and he's anxious. There's really no middle ground. So you can just see how we are designed to be in relationship. And outside of that design, we feel disoriented, distressed, and ultimately become disordered. So that connectedness is so important for human beings and our health. Just can't be ignored.
Yeah. That's, I think of a quote I heard, read somewhere from Mother Teresa. She said, loneliness and the feeling of being unwanted is the most terrible poverty. And thinking of it as a poverty is so powerful, I think. Beyond what you were just talking about there, how would you think about loneliness? How would you describe it, like the feeling? How does one become lonely?
I would say that person who is lonely does not have an abiding sense of loving and being loved.
Yeah. Okay.
An abiding sense that I matter to someone else and they matter to me. And, I experience love with that individual and they love me. That person who is experiencing loneliness, it does not have that assurance that they're loved and loving others.
Does you talked about that idea of the limbic system, and so then you used the word there, abiding, which is generally long lasting. Do you think loneliness is a permanent condition in that sense, or does it come in phases?
No, absolutely not. In fact, I was just looking at this stat from the Blue Zone study, which studied these longevity giants, the Adventist community in Loma Linda, and then also the Okinawan community in Japan. And the Okinawans have 5 to 6 good friends, people upon whom they can depend in times of need, it says. And this is a quotation from the author of the Blue Zone study, Dan Buettner. He says, "It is the stress-shedding power and influence of friendships over our day-to-day lives that adds years to life and life to years." So in answer to your question, is it a permanent condition? Absolutely, emphatically no. People can learn to love and be loved. In fact, I teach people friendship skills, and I break it down into 2 basic phases: friend making and friend keeping. And if people will master the skills entailed in friend making and in friend keeping, they do not have to be lonely. Here's the thing, is that our ability to connect to one another is built into us in our families of origin, so that it becomes second nature to connect if we're raised in a healthy, loving environment. But if not, it's still not too late, because people can learn. You can teach an old dog new tricks, and people can learn new patterns of relating. It's just that they have to be more intentional about it than they would have if it had been built into them from the time they were born. So no, absolutely not. It's not the end of the story. Loneliness is part of the story, but not the end of the story. And actually, there's this guy out of the University of Chicago. Unfortunately, he died recently. His name was Cacioppo. And he was the doyen of loneliness. He was like the guy that studied loneliness. And he said that at the outset of his studies of loneliness, he thought this is a plague. We need to avoid it at all costs. But toward the end, he realized there was really a benefit to it. That if people go through seasons of loneliness, it deepens them, and they learn how to make and they have a chance to assess, what is going wrong in my life, and then take another stab at it with more skills, and hopefully more skills and more insight. So it's not the end of the story. If you're lonely, it is not the end. You are learning. God is deepening you, and you will come back if you so choose, and you can learn how to love and be loved. Absolutely. I'm like cheerleader enthusiastic about that.
That's good. I was just thinking like the idea of, because sometimes we have these days where we're feeling lonely, and it might just be for a few hours. That's obviously probably on a different level than chronic loneliness. But I think what you just said there is that idea that we can actually ponder how to get out of it, maybe what's happening in our mental life at that point, and move
what
forward.
am I doing wrong?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's
how did
good.
I end up here? When it all goes quiet. I think Melissa Otto has a song about that. When it all goes quiet, and there's no one there, you have to ask, how did I get here? Yeah. And that can often be a great moment. And here's the thing is that you're never really alone. God is with you. He cares about you. And people will fail you. And sometimes people find themselves lonely, not because they've made mistakes, but because other people have hurt them or rejected them. But God is with you, and he loves you, and he will be by your side during that lonely patch. And you don't have to feel totally abandoned and forsaken because of him.
So we're talking about broken love. So can you talk about the connection between loneliness and love? Where does the disconnect come in terms of the word broken love?
Yes. Well, obviously, if people are not connected, then they are experiencing loneliness. And the antidote for that is bonding. And so in psychobabble, we call love bonding or attachment.
Okay. Yep. But
attachment entails certain skills. It entails certain neural pathways that have to be like carved out. And they're basically neural pathways of trust, where you learn how to open yourself up and be vulnerable with other people, and then be safe for them to be vulnerable with as well. And there's a skill set involved in that. If people don't have that active skill set, they're going to end up in a situation where they're not loving well. They're not loving successfully. I'm not saying it's always the fault of the person, or it's always something that they can identify in themselves, because there are tragic things that happen and people find themselves lonely. People die, their whole, their support circle can die, or anything can happen. But oftentimes what happens is people that don't have good relational skills end up unable to resolve conflict. That's a big one.
Yeah. Okay.
Unable to be vulnerable, unable to communicate on a meaningful level, unable to be honest, and then I would say also unable, and these things are kind of tied together, unable to resolve or manage is probably a better word, conflict, because conflict tends to, in relationships, come back over and over again. You don't necessarily make conflict go away, but you just learn how to manage it well.
Okay.
And so John Gottman, the marriage guy, he's just a genius marriage counselor. He's written a number of books, and he says that the difference between the masters and the disasters in married relationships, this applies to all relationships, is the repair system. That's what makes a difference between masters and disasters. If you have a repair system, you know how to work through difficulty with others. That's going to really be a blessing to you in terms of finding your way to love.
I'm going to jot that down, because we're going to talk about conflict in another episode in a couple of weeks. But that's probably a good one to look into there, the repair system. Okay, so What is it costing us spiritually when it comes to our relationship with God? What is loneliness? How does it impact our relationship with God?
If we're not connected horizontally and vertically, and if you look at the Bible, there tends to be a relationship between those two things. If people are truly in communion with God, they're going to at least seek out and do all they can to have communion with human beings. So if we have that connection, then we're going to be able to go deeper with God. But if we don't, I don't think nature takes kindly to a vacuum.
No.
And if you're disconnected, there's a vacuum. So into that
Yep.
vacuum is going to become something else. And it's usually going to be addictions. Media would be a big one. People watch shows because they want to see people,
Yep.
but it's a safe way to connect to. You see the faces, you see the people. It's all funny and it's warm and whatever, it's drama, but you don't have to invest anything in it.
Mm.
There are, substances. People become addicted to substances. They become addicted to sex. They become addicted to, gambling. I mean, there's sort of an endless list of things that human beings can turn into an addiction. There's almost always something that comes into that vacuum
Yep.
that worsens the situation and adds an additional layer of difficulty, because the person now, if they want to connect, has to deal with that addiction.
Mm.
But there's all of this research on the relationship between love and addiction. Some people saying you can't love unless you get past your addiction, and some people saying you can't get past your addiction without love.
Huh. So what
the
comes
question
first?
is, yeah, exactly, the chicken or the egg. And I would say both.
Yeah.
You've got to love people out of addiction.
Okay.
It's so many stories I've heard, and I'm sure you've heard of people who have been drawn out of addiction because somebody loved them. And they saw their value in the light of that person's love, and they realized, I'm worth saving.
Yep.
And so that's a big part of that person coming out of addiction. But then what does happen with addiction is it compromises the part of the brain that enables us to love. So that is the toxic cycle that we find ourselves in if we're compensating for our loneliness or our broken love with addictions.
Yeah.
That's going to make it harder for us to get unbroken love. And that's why we need God. He's the only one that I know that can stop those cycles.
So when we have that broken love, where that compensation you're talking about, we're not able to connect with God because we don't understand love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's that spiritual component, and we learn about God's love through, at least partly through, our human relationships.
Yeah.
And that's why God doesn't say, well, just love me and don't worry about all those rascals on earth. He says, love me and your brother, because there's things we can't learn about God without loving other human beings.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
So let's get practical then. How can we identify loneliness in its early stages? Or how do we spot it in others even?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's something the Holy Spirit can impress a person with.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's fairly easy to read body language if you're around a person and they're, or even just, kind of hard now because of social distancing. Everybody has to be far away from everyone else. But if you're in a social context and a person is not engaging, it's worth it to at least check in with that person and see if they want to.
Yeah.
And what happens so often when we have social context is we get comfortable with our homies and our mates, as they say,
Yeah.
in Australia. And there's just certain people we've built a rapport with, and we just love bouncing off of them. But opening up to another person on the outside becomes, it sort of wrecks that. But if we're really going to be Christians and love God and love other people, we're going to have to be willing to part with our fun little cliques and reach outside of them and look for the people that don't seem to be connecting. It's fairly easy to see.
Yeah.
And then just ask yourself, is there anyone in that person's life, if they died, who would be there to make the funeral arrangements? Or if they had an accident, who would take them home from the hospital? Ask yourself those questions. And it should be fairly obvious who the lonely people are. And it should not be difficult for us to find a way to connect with them. But I'll share with you something. that is a bit of a difficulty. When people are lonely, this is why, to me, the gospel has the answer to loneliness and the world doesn't.
Okay.
Because what the world says is if you're lonely, connect to people. But if a person is totally isolated and they try to connect to other people, 9 times out of 10, they don't have great social skills to begin with. And they're going to make the mistake of putting all of their needs on that one person because they're desperate and lonely. And there's
Yeah.
a sucking vacuum inside of them, this deficit of love. And they're going to put all their eggs in that basket, or they're going to make other social errors that are going to make it difficult for them to connect. What happens when we first and foremost know that we're loved by God is we go into the social milieu already loved. We're not trying to get human beings to fill a God-sized hole.
Yeah.
God has already filled that hole. What we know that we're not sufficient, just loving God, God said it's not good for man to be alone. He wasn't alone. He was with God, but God said he's alone. So there's a sense in which we're alone, even when we're with God. And so God calls us to social relationships, but we go to those social relationships in a much more constructive way because we already know we're loved by God. So we go there. It's like a potluck. We go there with something to share. We don't go there empty, always drawing from other people, which can make us feel afraid to connect because we're so needy. It's embarrassing.
Yep.
But if we go with something confident in the love of God for us, it makes a big difference. So to me, that enables us to cross the loneliness gap in a way that someone who did not believe they were loved by God could not. And it ends up being a Band-Aid versus real healing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's what you asked.
No, that's good. I was just thinking about the idea of overflow, and you said potluck.
Yes, that's right.
The potluck. So you're going there to something to share. That's good.
That's right. With the overflow of God's love for you.
Yeah.
You're not going there with a poverty mindset. You're going there with a wealth mindset.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's possible to know that you're loved. Like some of the times in my life when I've felt the most loved by God was when I felt the least loved by human beings. And so your heart can be full of the love of God. He can touch you right now and fill your heart with his love for you. You go to his word, read 1 Corinthians 13, read the Gospel of John, just reassure yourself, encourage yourself in the Lord that he loves you. He can fill your heart through his Holy Spirit. Romans chapter 5, verse 5 says, the love of God is poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who's given to us or shed abroad. There's an abundance, like you said, an overflow. God pours the stuff out on us. Our hearts are full, and then we go with wealth instead of going with poverty.
Yeah, love that. So you've given us a couple of things there. Is there anything else that we can do maybe on a emotional health, mental health level there to restore the brokenness? Do you have some tools that we can fight this emotional war with?
Yes. I would say that learn some basic social skills, some just really good basic abilities to connect with other people in those 2 ways that I mentioned before, making friends and keeping friends. And so I want to give you some of those points. One would be learn how to listen. Listening is so important. Learn how to have a conversation. A good, energizing conversation goes both ways.
Yeah.
One person says something, then another person says something. One person, then that person said, then another. And there's an energizing flow, and there's that back and forth. It's like a tennis game.
Yep.
So exciting, so much fun to smack that ball back and forth. The same thing with conversation. That's a healthy, enlivening, kind of energizing conversation. There's 2 kinds of conversations that aren't as energizing. One is where you're doing all the talking, and the other is where you're just sitting there passively listening. Both of those tend to be draining.
Yep.
So watch yourself in a social context and learn how to volley back and forth. And one of the ways that you do that is get other people to talk about what they care about, which is usually themselves. Asking people how they're doing, where they live, without being nosy, kind of be sensitive to where that line is, where you're just being downright nosy. And you can ask people what their likes are. Do you like the sunshine or do you prefer a little more overcast weather? Do you like warmer climates or colder climates? Do you like mountains, or are you more into the ocean? You can ask them their likes,
Yep.
and that's usually not too nosy, or different things that sort of tune into who they are in a non-invasive way. And then take your cues from what they say. So if they say, oh man, I just bought a house and blah, blah, blah because of the sunshine down there, then you go, oh, you just bought a house. Wow. How's the housing market? And
Yeah.
you pursue that line of conversation. So learn how to converse well. There are tutorials, there are books that can teach you skills, but mostly just get in there and try and watch for the going back and forth motion.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you're not doing all the listening or all the talking. So that's a big one. And then learning, if you got a default to either talking or listening, try defaulting to listening, but not passive listening, rather active listening. Okay, so active listening, the person retains some power in the relationship or some engagement in the relationship. So if you say, yeah, I had to go back to Australia for a while to get my visa straightened out, I would say back to you what you just said, but in my own words. So you've been back there for a little bit, trying to iron out immigration issues, and then you're coming back here when you're, and I'm assuming you're going to get, and then I might add a question to that. I'm assuming you're pretty optimistic that you're going to get through that, right? And then you would say something like, yeah, I think I'm going to get through. And so you're not like bummed out about it, and I can ask about how you feel and if it's been tumultuous. But see, what I'm doing there is I'm saying back to you what you've already said to me, and then asking curious questions. Again, not nosy, but curious, based on what you've already shared with me. So I'm building off of what you shared. So if you have to default to active listening, where you say back to the person what they said to you, and then ask a question based on that information. And then sometimes chime in with, I had the same experience.
Yeah.
I mean, I got sent back to my country and I was there for 3 years, and it was just so much red tape and bureaucracy. I couldn't believe how disorganized they were, or whatever.
Yeah.
So
that's good.
Those are some of the skills you can learn that are friend making skills. I would say with friend keeping, there's some cognitive distortions that people engage in that keep them from working past conflict. For instance, if there's conflict, if I get offended, that means it's a bad relationship and it's over. That's not true.
No.
The best relationships are the ones that come back from offendedness, hurt feelings, conflict, turmoil.
That's so true.
It's so much better. It's a wind blows strongest in the tops of the trees, and the strongest wood is where the wind blows the hardest. So let God mellow your relationships by working through conflict. And there's a lot to be said for conflict resolution. Jesus laid out the basic format of it in Matthew 18. And I would say it boils down to this: have the hard conversations. When something goes wrong with a relationship, you're going to feel like you got to talk about it. Mm-hmm. You're going to want to talk to other people. It's not always terrible, counselor or whatever, but most of the time you need to talk to that person too. In most cases, not every single one, but most cases. So decatastrophize. That probably won't be as bad as you think it will be, because most people are so unused to being direct and honest and upfront that they don't do it, and they never behaviorally refute their belief that it's going to be awful to do so. And they find that, hey, it actually went pretty well. He heard me and we worked it out and it was pretty good. I feel much better. Give yourself a chance to experience that by just being really honest with people. So that's a real key point of conflict resolution. Of course, there are a million others, but that's a real important aspect of it. So that's another skill involved in friend keeping, is being willing and able to get past conflict and past, interpersonal turmoil.
Because if
to a better place.
If you end up not keeping your friends and not making new friends, that's where loneliness comes in, right? That's where we're talking about this. Yeah.
That's right.
So to finish here, what would be one or two questions that we can ask ourselves to think through how loneliness is impacting our own life journey or our relationship with God?
Oh, very good. So one of the things you could ask yourself is, have I gone into the milieu of human relationships?
So that again, gone into the...
To the milieu, the realm of human relationships. God having poured his love into have I received the love of God and then gone to share that love with others? And if so, when have I done that and when have I not done it? So the point is not to cut yourself down so much as to identify when you're doing things
Mm-hmm.
that are going to build relationships and when you're doing things that are going to tear them down. So ask yourself that question.
That's good.
Also ask yourself if you have you been the kind of friend to other people that you want other people to be to you?
Mm.
And if so, great. If not, how can you be a better friend?
Yeah.
How could you go forth with better skills for building relationships?
Mm. I love
Yeah.
that. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. How can our listeners find out more about your work? We talked about Abide earlier. Where can we find you online?
All you have to do is go to abide.network. Just put that in the search engine. No .com, no nothing, just abide.network. It'll take you to a web page if you're interested in counseling.
Mm-hmm.
There's an intake form if you're interested in the anxiety and depression course. It's right there. If you're interested in any other books or in our training, all of it is on that web page. And if you can't find what you need, go through the contact form and we'll help you.
Thanks so much, Jennifer, for sharing with us. That was fantastic. How about that conversation, Bill?
Whoa. There is a lot we've got to talk about. I wish there was another hour to go, but man, Karl, what a conversation. I mean, just from even the beginning statistics you guys got into, all the way throughout the biblical metaphors. Let's dive into this.
Yeah, I was thinking initially that looking at where loneliness comes from as the result of a society that has forgotten about the emotional needs of others. That was kind of what I was picking up from the interview, where you have she was talking about this idea of friend making and friend keeping.
Yeah.
And so if we're lonely, we need to invest in others. It kind of seems counterintuitive because we want people to invest in us.
Yeah.
But it's true. We need to invest in others and be friend making.
Karl, when you talk about loneliness, I actually was thinking about a post I was going to put up on Instagram. I took a picture of myself alone at the beach because my wife wasn't there. I went with my family. And I was like, oh, this is such a beautiful sunset. I'm going to send this to Elena. And as I was thinking about that picture, I was like, gosh, she's missing. And then I thought about the notion of loneliness in marriage. A lot of times people don't think about this, but you could be lonely and married. And that's a crazy thing. You're like, wait, but I'm single. And I thought when I get married, that'll never be a problem. But really, this notion of friendship making is something you have to keep working on, even in a marriage, even in a friend group. I am talking to all of these freshmen now who've left. They've come back and they're seeing these friends they had in high school. And they're like, something's off, something's not right. Well, it's because they didn't invest in these friendships for a year. They're new people, new things. And so I think friendship making is something you have to be intentional about. You have to keep working on it.
Absolutely.
It isn't something that just happens naturally.
Yeah. And you know how she said we have to know that we are loved by God first? I think that is a big part of it too. We can't just be, I'm sure you got those friends who talk your ear off because they are desperately needing friends at the time.
Yeah.
But if they're coming into a relationship with knowledge that they are loved by God, they're not going to be as needy for that relationship with you.
Can someone still be lonely when they are in a committed relationship with God? I mean, where it's like, it's just me and him. It's just me and the Lord. That's all I
Look
need.
at Adam. Adam in the Garden of Eden. He was naming all the animals. And we have like him seeing all these male lion and the female lion come by, and he's like, "Hey, where's my other half?" So I think that's fair, but we have to remember that nature doesn't take kindly to a vacuum, like she said. So you have, when there is an absence, something is going to fill that spot, and we have to be really careful that it's not something dangerous.
Wow. Yeah. The idea of filling the void in bad and just unhealthy ways is something I'm really resonating with a lot lately. Not because I'm doing that, but I'm working with so many guys right now who are dealing with porn addictions, married, single, in dating relationships. And so Jennifer made this really good point. She said, when it comes to addictions and loneliness, you have to target both of them at the same time. You can't just assume that you're in a good
Yeah.
relationship that you're not going to be addicted, but also that some addictions are healed by a meaningful, loving relationship. So that's also a big space that I think we need to deal with intentionally. I think pornography comes out of a space of loneliness. I was talking to one young adult and he was saying, I've always craved a relationship with a girl, but I've found myself running to pornography instead. And I think that could be one of the
Mm.
reasons why I'm not in a committed relationship. And I think that's true. I think that's true.
Well, I think we also have to look at the like maybe he's diagnosed himself there as the kind of cause of his addiction. Like we were just talking about, that vacuum, that void that gets created when we don't have something that should be there, whether it's some kind of relationship or uh, loneliness or lack of loneliness, I should say.
Mm, mm, mm.
But that's something we're going to be looking into next episode on trauma. So that'll be another good conversation where this kind of theme comes up again. But let's close here. A couple of questions. Let's just repeat the questions that Jennifer kind of gave us to think about. Number one, have I gone into the realm of human relationships with God having poured into me? When have I done that and when have I not done that? So that's kind of a good question to think about, to start thinking about how you can improve in areas that you haven't done so well, and give yourself a pat on the back for, and be able to repeat the times when you have. The other question she said was, have I been the kind of friend to other people that I want other people to be to me? I think of the golden rule here, where that's basically what Jesus was saying. Do unto others what you want them to do to you. So be a friend to others and they'll be friends back.
That's awesome. Well, we want to leave you with a blessing as we always do. So may God bless you. May he fill you to overflowing. May his friendship with you be so satisfying that your heart is enthralled with his love, with his time, and with the words that he truly does believe and promise over you. You are my beloved. I no longer call you a slave, but a friend. So may Jesus be your ultimate friend, love, and companion in this journey. May God bless you with his peace and overflow. Amen.
Amen. Hey, thanks so much for listening in on our conversation today. If something we said made you think, or maybe you just want to say hello or give some feedback, we'd love to hear from you. You can send us an email at hello@choosetooverflow.com. You can find us on Instagram at choosetooverflow, or check out our website, choosetooverflow.com, where you can find more content, including a reflection guide for today's episode to help you take the conversation further. That's choosetooverflow.com. We also want to thank the Loma Linda University Church for their support of this project. And if this was helpful to you, please leave us a review, share with a friend or three, and subscribe to stay connected. We'll be releasing new episodes every Monday. Thanks again for listening. We hope you choose to overflow this week. Let's chat again soon.